So I'd like to start by just doing a brief around the table introduction, since there's a couple of people who I don't think I've met before. I'm Dick Olmsted. I'm current chair of the tree board. Marty, you want to go next?
Marty Byrne, tree board.
Mark Phillips, tree board, maybe the newest member.
Yes.
Still can claim that.
Larry Goldman, I'm the council member and liaison to the tree board. Matt Blaine, the city clerk.
Okay.
No, it's brutal tree board.
Sarah Phillips.
Citizen.
John Brew, I'm with the Stewardship Foundation and a citizen.
All right. Thank you all for coming. The first item we have on the agenda is a short reflection, which we haven't done much of lately. So I took a few minutes with my favorite author, natural history author today, and came up with a short passage that was my first introduction to Aldo Leopold. When I was a freshman in college and my introductory botany professor read this entry for October, which I thought was fitting, even though trees are only in passing a part of this. Smoky gold. How many people have read Aldo Leopold's San Camino? Oh, well, you've got a tree in front of you. You have it, yeah. Okay. Smoky gold. There are two kinds of hunting: ordinary hunting and ruffed grouse hunting. There are two places to hunt grouse: ordinary places and Adams County. There are two times to hunt in Adams: ordinary times and when the tamaracks are smoky gold. This is written for those luckless ones who've never stood, gun empty and mouth agape, to watch the golden needles come sifting down while the feathery rocket that knocked them off sails unscathed into the jack pines. Tamarack changed from green to yellow when the first frost had brought woodcock, fox sparrows, and juncos out of the north. Troops of robins are stripping the last white berries from the dogwood thickets, leaving the empty stems of pink haze against the hill. The creekside alders have shed their leaves, exposing here and there an eye full of holly. Brambles are aglow, lighting your footsteps grouseward. The dog knows what is grouseward better than you do. You will do well to follow him closely, reading from the cock of his ears the story the breeze is telling. When at last he stops, stock still, and says with a sideward glance, "Well, get ready." The question is, ready for what? A twittering woodcock, or the rising roar of a grouse, or perhaps only a rabbit? In this moment of uncertainty is condensed much. In this moment of uncertainty is condensed much of the virtue of grouse hunting. He who must know what to get ready for should go hunt pheasants. I grew up hunting grouse in upstate New York, which is the exact same habitat that Aldo Leopold writes about in Wisconsin.
Could I share something?
Yes.
This is not about trees, but it's more about the kind of people that like to park a track. We have new neighbors moving into across the driveway. They're a young Chinese couple with a kindergarten age boy. And last weekend, the lady of the house, they hadn't moved in yet, but the lady of the house, they were there just kind of checking on things. And she brought over Chinese mooncakes. This celebrates the Mid-Autumn Festival in China, and it's one of their 4 major festivals. And so I would like to share it with you. It's when you share these with friends and family, you wish them prosperity and a great new year. So I'm going to stick some toothpicks in this, and it's I don't know all the ingredients, but the main ingredient is lotus seed paste, which is what's in the middle. So pass this around and taste it if you like.
I was afraid for a second you were going to pass the toothpicks around individually. No.
When they came to look at the house, when it was up for sale, the 5-year-old, the kindergarten guy, we have creeks running through both of our properties, all 4 of them in that little complex. And he went down to the little bridge on their creeks, and he came back skipping and singing, "Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream." And I thought, oh, I hope they want that house.
And I'll take it.
Thank you.
That's good. I've been to China several times. And the first time I was there, it was right at the time when the autumn festival is just beginning. Everything stops, and everywhere on the street there are little vendors selling mooncakes.
There's an article on NPR today about by an author who grew up in California, and the Costco that she was near sold mooncakes. So she said that's the only reason to go to Costco on a Sunday afternoon.
I'll bet you can find them in certain Asian markets.
Oh, I'm
I think
sure.
here.
Yeah, the lady of the house always did.
Okay, I want to thank Matt for putting together the agenda for today and do I have any suggestions or additions for the agenda before we move to adopt it? Okay,
I move to adopt the agenda.
okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. Agenda is adopted. I don't think we have minutes for the last meeting to be approved. So we'll have to wait until the next.
There's no meeting technically, so there's.
Oh, that's right, it was not it was
I'll get
not,
together.
yeah, I wasn't able to be here. Okay, so,
We,
So presumably.
you're fine until I move.
Adopt the minutes from the previous,
oh,
if the July meeting existed. I don't think it exists yet.
was that something that our previous staff person was supposed to prepare?
Yeah.
And so-
Now it's falling to me to produce it.
So there's a recording, right? So you could listen to the recording and through, thank you. So,
Everything is, all the recordings are up on it. So
yeah, well, you know, this isn't the first time we've been disrupted by staff.
Yeah.
Change turnover, and hopefully we'll get, settled down again soon. The next item on agenda is citizen comments, so this is the time when citizens can provide input, and we ask you to restrict it to 3 minutes.
My name is Sarah Phillips. I'm the chair of the Climate Action Committee for the city of Lake Forest here. And I want to talk to you about that for just 1 second. And that is to say that we're moving towards a document, the production of a document. And one of the sections is on natural environment, ecosystems, and sequestration. And we're hoping that when we get our document a little more fulsome, you'll have an opportunity to look at it and give comments to it. The second thing I want to talk to you about is a Miyawaki forest. And I want to tell you that a Miyawaki forest is a dense native forest that it's an urban forest because it's a human-made forest. And because they're densely packed, the trees grow quickly. They sequester significant amounts of carbon. They're the same, according to the literature, the same as a 10-year. In 10 years, it grows and sequesters the same amount as 100 years of a natural forest. There's something, they're pushed in together, they're competing for light, whatever leaves and stuff drop to the floor, they hold water better and the roots go deeper. I'm telling you that because we're putting one in Shoreline. I'm working with the Shoreline Historical Museum and we're going to plant on December 9th. We thought we had 14 months and an anonymous donor gave the museum enough money to do the landscaping and planting. So we're going to put one in, and what I think is important about this is it's a demonstration of how you create an urban forest. And it can be done in the size of two parking spaces. This at the museum is 4,800 square feet. We have going to plant 1,200 trees of various sizes. It'll be a community event where people are planting, and I think it's something that you as the tree board ought to be thinking about. You should go out and see it. I think as we look at regulations and what kinds of things are included in this trees and what we can put in cities, that you will keep this in mind and help us plan when you come out if you decide you want to talk to Martin. Tell you about what it is, but it's a very exciting prospect. So those, my done. Those are that's like 3 minutes worth of discussion.
Thank you. I would note that there was a really informative article in the New York Times about 3 weeks ago about Milwaukee Forest. I don't know if you saw it.
Yes, I got 14 copies of it.
Okay, so if anybody wants to know more,
Yeah.
you could do a New York Times search on Milwaukee Forest.
Right.
Pull that up.
And there are a couple of books that have been written and they're sort of floating around. I've got them in, they're at third place about planting. And I think it's just a remarkable way where we can both sequester carbon, reduce temperature, and have a place where people can be in the forest environment.
Yeah. although that density not.
Yeah, you can't get next to it.
Yeah.
Well, because it's a museum, the one in Shoreline, we're putting a pathway through it, and
Oh, that-
we're also, it's called a forest museum. And the museum part will, there'll be a pathway through it. He's done, these have also been done in Yakima, they're healing forests, and we're working with the Duwamish tribe. So the Duwamish have a list of 48 species that we, of native, species that they use for medicine and, food production and other things that are symbolic to them, and those will be included in this process.
Do they plant other things on the tree in the Milwaukee Forest? There's not 48 native trees.
You know, trees, shrubs, there'll be, it's 4 levels. It's the understory, the sort of shrub level. I don't know, medium size, big trees, and then climax trees. So it'd be
Will they all be native, or is there going to be some?
all native. The notion being that you want to create a biodiversity. I mean, you won't speak into the tree, right? You bring native trees and plants in, then we bring birds and bugs and worms and I guess raccoons. Don't run this.
Yes,
But that would be a dimension to it.
well, I'm really eager to see it. How it works out.
Yeah.
Thank you. John, did you have something that you want to say?
Brief comment. Yesterday I got to attend a meeting with Sound Transit, the CEO, the deputy CEO, and a number of the upper level staff. And as part of the Stewardship Foundation, some people from CORE, and then also Deputy Mayor French and Councilmember Puritani. It wasn't always what we wanted to hear, but the meeting lasted 2 hours, and I think Sound Transit got a good earful of our concerns. Deputy Mayor French in particular brought out trees, heat island effects, etc. So just, I feel like at least a little traction is occurring. Sound Transit is listening to Lake Forest Park, so I thought I would report that.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a question? If it's not out of place,
Go ahead.
was this a public meeting? Because I was not informed about it.
I was informed through CORE set it up, Jeff Smith, and so I was just I'll say an attendee. I apologize. I don't know the logistics on this thing. So don't shoot the messenger.
Oh, no, if it was meant, like, Sound Transit is counting this as public outreach or not. I would say it wasn't public outreach if it wasn't open to the public.
Yes, I can't comment. It's basically.
So you're not alone. It was actually someone who thought at your meeting, we received emails this week about from South Transit, I do it anyway. And it linked to the sort of report of the meeting we held, that was held 2 months ago, a month and a half ago. And the consecutive questions were, well, why are if bus lane is so great on 145th or on in Lake City, why isn't it okay on 145th? The answer is that's, well, when we look at it, we can't do it there. And when, okay, so why can't we do it here? Well, we always planned to do it here. And it was sort of, you know, on 145th, we can adapt because the situation is wrong. But in Lake City, we can't adapt because we've been planning this all along. It was kind of irritating. It's a fact, but it's kind of irritating.
Imagine that on steroids.
Well,
That was the nature of part of the meeting with Sound Transit, similar
Well, I
kind of circular logic.
my observation at that meeting was that Julie Kim may regret some of the decisions that were made by her predecessor, but is too good a administrator to say, yeah, the people before me screwed up, but I can't do anything about it. You don't work in a bureaucracy that way. But a couple times I really had to feel she wanted to say that.
All right. The next item on the agenda is communications, and this is usually a time when the city staff liaison may have announcements. We may not have anything ready. It's
I don't have anything for the straightforward.
although this might be a time where we could ask if there's any known status on the search for new arborist or new city liaison staffer?
It's ongoing. That's as far as I know.
You're not at the point of having interviews or anything, yeah.
I haven't heard of any,
Applications are coming in, or-
yeah, applications are coming in. I haven't heard of it. Candidates that have been.
Is there a new city planner yet?
No.
Somebody told me that getting a new arborist and a new Riley, whatever it was going to happen after they had a new city planner who was going to be their boss.
I could chime in on that. So the original plan was to get, so the title's changed, it's now Community Development Director. The plan was to get that person in as the department head, and then they would work on hiring an arborist and assistant planner. There have been delays getting that in, so we've made the decision to move forward on all three positions at the same time. So interviews and such are happening. I'm not, beyond that, though, I don't have any details for you beyond just the generalities. But yeah, the city is currently searching for all three positions.
So we're already on plan B. Have there been interviews for the community development director?
I think right now we're at the point, right, it's the HR director is kind of sifting through them. And then there's going to be interviews that'll be staff members, council members, we'll have like an all day meeting. But yeah, right now, I think it's at the HR going through and reaching out to candidate stage.
Is that a fourth position or is that what another name for the city planner?
The community development director, that's the new title for the planning director, Steve Bennett's job before he retired. Since he retired, we decided to kind of like, not just rename it, but also look at what the duties are and see if we could kind of modernize the position.
Thank you.
Well, I had heard there was a very strong candidate that had been identified like a month ago. Maybe I was wrong. I don't know.
The city has decided not to move forward.
I didn't misunderstand it. It just wasn't that strong. He or she wasn't that strong.
Yes, I don't think I can reveal any specific information, just
No.
the city has not decided to move forward with any particular candidates yet.
Anything else in the way of communications or questions you might have for the city? Okay, let's move on to old business. The first item on here is an ivy removal demonstration, which Marty has been working at helping to, trying to set up. And we thought we had a plan that sort of fell apart a little bit at the last minute. But you want to give an explanation for what the plan is without the details of an actual demonstration?
It's still part of a plan because we don't have a date, we don't have time, we don't have a place. And until we get those resolved, we have no demonstration. I'm going to assume that you read the proposal that was included in the packet, so I won't go over all that. The location on 35th at the Carrie Lewitt home area looks very feasible because it's private property and there's a good chance we can get permission to do this. I'm assuming.
Yeah, I've been in touch with those folks in the past because the stream keepers test water there. So I did contact the person there who helped manage that property, and she has said it would be fine for us to do that.
Okay. Good, that's good news.
What's the nature of the property? Is it a private home or is it just a privately owned
It is.
but undeveloped property?
It is property that's owned by the Presbyterian Church, I think.
Oh,
And it provides residences for certain people.
I don't know if you've been by there, but there's a chain link fence along a really big open field. And then there's a long avenue of poplars, lumber and poplars. And then on the other side of that is a variety of trees, including lots of ivy infested evergreens. So it's a great location, and if we can get permission to do that, I think.
And I think it's parking for 5, 6, 7 cars, and
Yeah.
8 cars, maybe in an adjacent street. Potentially.
Yeah,
I
there's,
think that would be good.
yeah, I don't think we'd have to worry about traffic other than people slowing down to watch what we're doing, but as he said, there is parking. There's a driveway, so there's people to stand and watch the demonstration. So I think we should move forward with that location.
good.
As far as the day is concerned, I was trying to coordinate the event with publicity with LFP's publications, but that's gonna be a bit of a challenge. So I think we should go ahead with the event, and I'll worry about the wrap up later. I'm not available for much of, for the Saturdays, the rest of the Saturdays in October, but that doesn't mean I can't go forward. Or we could move it to early November, one of the first couple Saturdays in November. And that would still get us some publicity after that. So I'm not gonna ask for commitments tonight, but if you wanna look at your calendars and see, and come back to me individually with dates that might work for you, we can settle on the date. What else?
I don't know if everybody has read through this, but part of the plan would be to also create a video
Yes,
that could be uploaded on the city website.
Yeah.
About ivy removal.
that's part of the plan too, so.
Well, I guess I'm a little confused about what the main purpose of this is. Is it mainly to make a video, mainly for people to see us taking down ivy, or mainly to get some serious ivy off the trees?
Little of both.
I don't think that's thought to, I should, speak for you, but it's not an ivy removal project. It's an ivy removal demonstration.
Demonstration. I think, when we initially talked about this, when we've had ivy removal stuff before, it's been collect all your ivy, we'll have a contest. Well, I don't think a contest is worth doing. But if you can show people how to do it, or at least get started doing it, I think that's worth doing. And if we can do a live demonstration and also video it and put it on our website, we can point to that and say, go see this and start working on your own trees.
See, I'm glad you raised that question, because in my mind, I've been wondering, how is this gonna play out? What is it gonna look like? Because it seemed to me to demonstrate removing ivy might take 5 or 10 minutes to intercept the ivy branches and maybe pull some of the ones that are accessible. And then to do a circle around the tree would seem to be two key elements of the ivy removal process. And I think it would be good if we had 10, 15 people show up to say, bring gloves and have them do at least that much on, if there are 4, 5, 6 trees right there.
Yeah.
That are all from the ground up and approach the bottom, the surface is covered. So I think it would be good to encourage people to plan on spending an hour pulling ivy right there.
Demonstration and participation.
Yeah. And I imagine, I don't know if you'd already talked to the city about removing the pile of ivy that we created, but that would be a nice part of it too.
No.
I don't think that we want people to think they have to participate in the ivy pulling. They just want to come and see what they could do on their own property, but getting people's hands on would be good.
Yes, if I understand you're a lead demonstrator, so if you demonstrated the process, you could have 2 or 3 people take this tree and 2 or 3 people take the next tree.
And I haven't seen the site, so I don't know how big the pieces of ivy are, but they can be as big as your forearm sometimes, in which case it's hard work.
They're not that big.
Okay.
As I recall, they're more manageable. Some of them probably will not be possible to get it all off the tree. Go higher. There may be a few cases where we can do that. But and I think maybe a piece of paper, a 1-page summary of your remarks, problems with ivy, and why we want to remove them, and would probably be a
To hand out.
have a handout.
Yeah.
I can work with you on that, when you get to the point of publicity, you're putting the article out. If that's just general direction I'm gonna go, is to encourage people to bring gloves and help remove ivy in a small area there.
Yeah, well, you can always make it optional. Come and watch, or if you want to participate, bring your gloves and clippers.
Or I can bring some extra pair of leather gloves.
It's more a matter of what kind of advice you use to peel ivy off the tree.
Yeah,
Having people bring that.
and I've done a lot of that, and it's, there's certain tricks you can use, but if they're way up in the trees, you can never get it all off.
Right.
But if it's not so big, you can pull it off and just make sure you don't.
Sometimes it can be fairly hard to get the ivy. I've had an old chisel I used for decades.
I have a folding pruning saw. You just slip that down between the trunk and the ivy, and you can just until you get it off enough that you can pull out.
I've heard 2 things. You guys can clarify this for me. And when you look at ivy, It's got those little tendrils that come out, but I don't know if those are just holding it to the tree. Or if they're actually, taking
Adventitious roots.
nutrients and water out.
They will absorb water, but, so that's why if you cut ivy off this time of year, it'll stay green all winter, because they're absorbing enough through that. But in the summer, they can't get enough to stay alive, and so they will die.
Well, they're bad for trees, but
Are they actually getting water from the tree though, or just from the wet bark?
Just from the wet bark,
Yeah,
right, because the
they're not
tendrils don't
actually-
penetrate the bark,
Yeah,
they're
they're not
just
injuring the trees,
hold on to the surface of the bark.
but they aren't.
So
Yeah.
the main problem then is wind sail effect.
I think so, the weight that it adds to the
Extreme,
tree
uh,
and the
extreme
increased
extreme.
resistance that they provide in the wind.
And just dragging down with that, I think, probably too.
Good.
Good.
But one of the other things that's really important about the biology of ivy that makes it, getting it off trees so critical, is that when ivy grows out along the ground, as you see it everywhere, it can spread quite a ways, but it's not going to spread across the street or a driveway or something like that. Only when it grows up on something does it become reproductive. It then produces flowers, fruits, and the birds take the seeds away. And so if you keep it from growing up on anything, it will help prevent it from being distributed more widely. I personally an advocate for getting it all, removing it all, but just getting it off trees is really important for preventing the spread.
If you get a chance to, in your travels around the town. You can look-
I will, now that I have that address, I'll go just drive by there.
Thank you.
Anything else about that, Marty, or? any
No, that
other
gives me enough to work on. I'll update this and I'll send it out to.
Okay. Okay, the next item was the draft ordinance regarding amendments, and Matt included that with our packet for today.
I will say that the city council is considering final approval of final regulations on October 12th.
Okay. And so nothing really has changed, I think, since we considered this or heard about it last in July. Or maybe it was August, but I wasn't here, so. Or September, with whatever our last one, I guess we didn't have a July meeting, we had an August.
Didn't have an office.
We didn't have a September, right, we had one meeting in mid-August that accounted for August.
So we had to get together.
We had to get
The get together in mid-August, the last real meeting was early July. And I don't think we talked about it much at the get together, I can't even remember.
I'm not sure I was able to get together. I may have been in the hospital, but
You were here.
I have no issue with it. I was in the hospital for a while. There was like, hey, there's something.
No, I think you were here, it was.
So maybe
three of us, just the three of us were the only ones who were.
Oh,
The August
here.
26th.
you make it sound like we had a party or something.
It wasn't a forum, so.
We
I
had
don't
it was
get
going to
called
be a
meeting.
meeting, and then Sandy wasn't able to make it at the last minute, so we. Just sat and talked about the same things we would have talked about anyway. Yeah, we did talk about this actually quite a bit now that I remember.
Okay. When I was looking through this and thinking back about all the work that we have done on recommendations for changes in the code, I looked through the whole code as it is currently posted on the city website, and I was struck, since we're talking about the code, I thought I'd bring this up. I was struck by an item in section 16.14.090 on entitled tree replacement. And under point B, it says replacement tree species shall be selected from the approved general tree list for the city of Lake Forest Park. And I am pretty sure, Doug, you may be the only one here who was around for these conversations, that we had decided that that list would be a recommended list, not a required choose from this list. And I don't know how that didn't make it into the code. I presume what's on the website is the changes that were adopted last winter. And so I'm wondering if this is something we should revisit. One of the things that I want to work on this winter anyways is the tree list.
Yeah, yeah.
And
We talked about not writing the current list into the amendment, or the, what do you call it, the ordinance.
yeah.
Is it-
And I looked at the last sort of marked up copy that I could find on my computer, sort of had this whole section struck. And it said something about, a choice of tree recommendations from the recommended list. And the approval of the arborist and so on, but it didn't say that it shall be selected from this list.
Is that all trees or just the ones in the right of way?
Replacement trees for the general tree replacement to go along with the tree removal permit.
What section again, Richard? You said?
16.14.090. It's not in the copy that you have because that just includes the sections that were amended for this,
Oh,
unfortunately, so.
okay.
It says the following apply to tree replacement required under the chapter. That is on tree permit and replacement. And it says replacement trees shall be selected from the approved general tree list for the city of Lake Forest Park. And then there's some words about special emphasis will be given to choosing native tree species and conifers replacement in kind and things like that, but I thought my recollection was, and this was something I was concerned about, that it not be a required that it be chosen from that list, because there are literally hundreds of wonderful species of trees that could be planted at Lake Forest Park, and to have a relatively short list that says you must choose from.
Well, I consider taking that up. Taking a separate set of amendments.
Yeah, I think there's a couple other things that something you have
There's
thought
one
that
that
we
I'm worried about the canopy coverage thing, so. But the discussion I recall us having was more about the fact that it says if you cut out an evergreen, you have to replace it with an evergreen.
Yeah.
I was really unhappy with that.
Yeah.
And that got taken out, I think. But I'm not sure we ever.
Or it was changed from a must to a
Should.
or it's recommended or.
I don't recall actually.
Yeah.
I don't recall realizing it was requirement.
I don't remember the discussion. Well, I do remember the discussion. I think it was before I was a member of the board, so I mean, I'm saying.
You may have been on the council. at the time this was discussed.
Probably not, but I had been my understanding that was a recommended, it was
Yeah.
strongly recommended.
But I looked on and this gets to something that Sandy is going to be talking about in a bit about changing things on the website. On the website, it also says replacement trees must be drawn from the list. So those are things that I think we should consider.
Was there an exception in case of critical areas? Where,
Well, for critical areas, there were some other restrictions,
and maybe a requirement for native?
maybe, but yeah. Sandy,
Yeah, oh dear. I had a question about the webmaster and who is doing the updates.
let's come to that when we get to new business and the website update, okay?
Okay, so the other related part is you said that you had a copy of the ratified version. And
Well, I just have the copy that's on the city's website under the city code. You can go, I pulled up that chapter that pertains to the tree ordinance. And so it's hard to get, you may be able to pull that up there, but I don't have the code or the password to get it here, but I've downloaded a section.
What's on the screen?
Oh, it's on, there to go. There you go. Thank you, Matt. So there it is on the screen. A little small for my eyes to read from here, but. It's section B is the.
Shall be selected, yeah.
Yes, please.
My recollection, because I think I was the liaison at the time, is that the tree board discussed, there was evergreen versus conifer and maybe versus shall. I don't believe I remember any conversations about whether the tree list itself should be mandatory or recommendation.
Yeah.
So I don't believe you as a group had that discussion.
My recollection is that our sense was that the tree list should be a recommended tree list. Rather than a required tree list.
We've also made we also said that we wanted to include, again, we keep talking about doing this, and we should do it. Get some no trees, some
Yes.
proscribed trees that
Yeah.
either are absolutely not allowed or very discouraged. And again, that's a question of how we want to make it recommended or.
Well, there is, that's one of the things I was tracking down in my latest review of this material was that those noxious trees. And I did finally find them in King County.
Yep.
And that's what our code refers to.
Yep.
They're not class A, they're not class B, they're not class C, they're weeds of concern or trees of concern.
There's at least one species in the tree list that is one that is a non-native and invasive species that, you know,
Right.
caught my eye when I was reading through that list.
But there is a list of 8 trees specifically called out in King County's material, and so I was just curious. I didn't find the Washington State references particularly helpful, but I think that's in the text, and I don't see trying to change it, but
Yeah, I think the King County noxious tree board or noxious weed board does a lot better work than almost anyone else in the state on that sort of thing.
hey, it's an interesting issue, and it's always been since I've been working with trees, you know, in the original tree task force, the original rewrite of the first vote, is that issue of should be native replacements or you know, open the door to others for replacement trees. And I guess my own thinking is that it's that I'm okay with having that the way it is, as being the that they shall be selected from that native tree list, which is
Tree list is not
all
native.
The
native.
tree list includes
all-
natives, but most of the things on it are not
They're
native.
not native. Okay, well then there you go. I guess it's not
But-
because
Yeah,
people have the ability to plant any kind of tree they want anytime in their yard. If it's
Sure.
this is the case of replacement trees that we're talking about. But I guess I didn't realize that there was non-natives on that list.
and once it's open to non-natives, then why are we restricting some non-natives by not having them on the list? You know, I think of a couple of my favorite trees like the Vidia and blue crate of the dove tree. It's a wonderful, wonderful tree. It's not on the list, but
Me, it's like-
I was gonna say, if we're talking about the tree list, there's in the proposed ordinance that will be taking up October 12th, there's 2 references. And so I think it would be helpful just to get the tree board's take on those sections, just to get your opinion up. Matt, would you be able to pull that up? It's page 11 of 20 in the ordinance.
You mean in the handout?
In the, I don't know what page of the packet, but the ordinance itself says page 11 of 20.
oh,
Yeah.
The gist of it is that it's a shall, so it's a requirement. So for both right of way and right of way corridor permits, any trees replanted in rights of way shall be from the general tree list 15 to 30 plus foot height. This will get the tree board's take on that.
so. Yeah, I guess, you know, for rights of way, it's might be a little different, that the city might want to have more input on what goes in the right of way. Rather than it's-
favor shorter trees, I suppose.
You know, well, although they say 30 to 50 foot plus, that's a big tree.
I mean, there's all those trees on, trees I thought about so much, trees on 35th going up the hill, all those big flame maples, they're 40, 50, I don't know. 40, 50 feet high, and they were wonderful, so. No, they're not in a place that are restricting a view over the lake. You know, and if you're looking over the lake, maybe you don't want 50-foot trees, but,
Well, remind me, the list that we're referring to here, it says Lake Forest Park, 15 foot to 30 foot plus. There's another section of that list, right, that's taller trees?
Yes. So what page are you looking at?
On what we got tonight,
Yeah.
it's page 11 of 20 in the code section. Page 14.
Got it.
and also.
On page 14, yeah.
There's a comment there on the side. I believe it's from
No, good.
Bill.
Probably
There are
does,
2 lists, the 15 to 20 foot height and the 25 to 30 foot height.
Oh, I see.
And we did bring up to them that the plain maple.
Oh, there we go. So
30
that-
I think if you're talking about that in particular, since the plain maple is on the 15 to 20 foot list,
Yeah.
it would be allowed under that. So any tree, so there's 4 lists. 15 to 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45 plus. any tree that's on the first two of those lists would be allowed. And any tree that's listed on the last two of the lists would not be allowed.
But, and the,
And flame maple is on the first list, so it would be allowed.
but also Phil has suggested adding a plus, a very subtle little blue plus here after height. 5C.
If the name of the tree list, it's 15 foot to 20 foot plus height. I don't know why the plus is there, unless it's to kind of cover the fact that some individual trees may be taller than 15 or 20.
Okay,
I basically thought it was designed just to include larger trees. So
Yeah.
15 to 30 plus,
so you can add something that would go to 80 feet if you wanted to.
I mean, that's something, so I think that's a matter if the tree board wants to make a recommendation. So there's 4 tree lists. The ordinance as written would only allow trees from list 1 and 2. If the tree board's feeling is that trees from lists 3 and 4 should also be considered, then that section could be amended.
So is the concern that right of ways, you don't want tall trees because of things like power lines and other issues that might interfere with trees in the right of way?
I would think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have much undergrounding yet.
Yeah.
But maybe there are other thoughts on that too, other considerations.
Well, I don't know.
I guess I'm always inclined toward flexibility and giving people a chance to use their intelligence in a given situation. Because there's a lot of places where a 30-foot tree, or more than a 30-foot tree is inappropriate. But there's plenty of places where it are, and I'm thinking,
Yeah,
it would be nice if we could recall and rely on the intelligence of the landowner, the person planting the tree. Not to put a
And
ill
if the-
thought of tree there.
if the power line's on one side of the street, why restrict size of trees that might go on the other side of the street?
But
It might be appropriate to say that the trees that planted under power lines should not be. But who's gonna make that? The power company probably restricts those because they come through in black and black anyways.
I suppose you have other issues like where you have sidewalks. Few parts of the city that have sidewalks that,
There are sidewalks in the city.
there are some.
What if that's it?
Yeah, but I'm assuming that a taller tree would have a larger root structure as a rule, and so you might get more structure on the sidewalks.
yeah, not necessarily though. Some of these, well, I always come back to my own front yard, but we have a cherry tree, 3 cherry trees. They're in our front yard, they're like this big at the base, but they've been always kept pruned back, so they're only 20 feet tall, but they're probably 50, 60 years old. They just. And they're not actually that bad for the sidewalk. We have other problems. Comcast did much more damage to our sidewalk than any trees.
I think
any tree has.
The depth of roots is not necessarily associated with the height of the tree. Right, so some small trees might have shallow roots that would be disruptive to the sidewalk. And some tall trees might have deeper roots that would not.
The species, I mean, Lombard poplar is notorious for disrupting anything nearby, which I presume is probably on our list.
Well, I don't know that we need to go into this any further now, but maybe we should, again, this winter. Take a read of the code and see if there are any other edits that are.
I'm hoping to, on this specific issue, so just for a bit of clarification. In the process, any tree replacement plan that a utility has would have to be approved by the city.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, if you took out the height requirement, then there would still be someone from the city making sure that you're not planting an 80-foot tree right on like the curb of 522. So is the feeling, I'm not trying to push you in either direction, but I just want to kind of get a sense of the room. Are you in favor of kind of keeping the 30-foot, like limiting it to the first 2 tree lists? Or would you like to open it up to all the tree lists as long as there's some oversight from someone in city staff?
Well, as Doug said, we like to believe that our residents are intelligent and they will understand that if you plant an 80-foot tree under a power line, somebody's going to top it. So I kind of agree with offering them the first 2 lists, but again, anybody can plant any kind of tree they want in their yard. Sandy's got her hand up.
Sandy?
Another possibility might be kind of the neighborhood constituency viewpoint of taller trees. So they do obstruct a view, for example, and they would also, they appear threatening to your property, including fences and things like that. So I would actually, recommend giving some thought to that height and the overall aesthetic of what those trees look like. That'd be my opinion.
Or perhaps we could add a phrase at the end of that saying, or alternatives approved by the city arborist. And that would give the city give the permittee some flexibility in making the case for species that might not be on that list.
And I guess my feeling is that this material has been worked over a lot. And I'm happy to, unless there's something really egregious that we feel about and we wanted council to work on it some more. I'm okay with it the way it's written for the most part. I haven't seen anything that I thought was a must change in my mind. And we, like you say, that we just pointed out, there will be other checks on particular pieces of this in terms of the city administrator's authority and the arborist's authority to review plans and make point by point determinations. But like I said, my feeling is I'm ready to kind of live with this for a while, and that doesn't mean that we as a board can't continue to talk about particular points that we think are important for the future.
And that,
I think that's probably a good point, but I actually agree with what I think Larry was suggesting, that as long as we have the city arborist looking at anything, as long as we're talking about right of way trees, for that part of the time, the city arborist can, if somebody wants to plant a 45-foot tree in place and say not appropriate, city arborist can say so. Even if it's 45-foot trees are on the tree list, city arborist can say, yeah, they are, but not there. So,
and I think that in conversations we had about this in the early stages of revisions, that it was clear that the arborist has some flexibility in approving permits and what goes into them. And I think that's as it should be, whether it's stated or not.
I had a question about also about replacement trees, but on a little different topic. Where it's defined in here, the preferred offsite planting areas, which we worked on, and the council has incorporated into this. I'm just curious if there's been any discussion. I don't think we have, but if the council has any discussion about a mechanism whereby that would happen. The plan on the council to I don't know, send out a postcard to everybody in those areas saying you might need, and you might have the possibility of free trees in the future, or anything that might make that actually happen if Sound Transit or some other agency wanted to use it.
I could take that. My understanding is the plan is for the city to ask Matt to do all that work. No, in seriousness, the plan is to encourage Sound Transit to partner with King Conservation District for tree replantings. And then it would be King Conservation District that would be working on outreach to the public.
Okay, well, that sounds like
Sandy?
I mean, that's what Sound Transit, they partnered with KCD in Shoreline to handle their tree plantings in Shoreline. So I would imagine they would do something similar for here.
Yeah.
Sandy, is your hand still up, or is that okay? Anything else on this subject? We've sort of branched out away from the ordinance a little bit, but I think I agree that with Mark that we shouldn't worry about editing this anymore at this point.
I'm going to go along with that, but I'm bothered by one thing right here at the end of it. It says street trees shall be pruned only by permit granted by the city. I have street trees and I prune them many times, several times a year. And I don't get permits for them. I don't want to get them. I prune them because they hang over the sidewalk, and as the branches get heavier and heavier, they go down into the sidewalk. And another part of the ordinance, city ordinance requires me to keep the sidewalk there. So I don't think anybody's going to actually pick on this point.
Yeah,
And it's in line with the state board park, you need a permit. But
I don't think the city should mind that people maintain the trees on their right of way in front of their house.
But well, say you get them permits to do it, though.
But well, what if I went out to prune the trees in the right of way? Would you be okay with that? You not knowing anything about pruning trees?
In the right away in front of your house.
Yeah,
All you're doing is cutting the branches back that are going into the sidewalk. Yeah, go ahead,
Or
do
if
it.
they're low enough that would make you duck to go under them or something.
I raised that facetiously, I guess. But there's a lot of unevenness, I'm sure, in terms of the ability that people have to prune those trees.
Is there a reason why we would remove that section? I can think of a lot of reasons to leave it. But are we discussing removing it?
Well,
I don't
that's
think
at the
so.
bottom of page.
Okay.
Street trees shall be pruned only by permit granted by the Lake Forest Park Public Works Department. Where is this? On the bottom 17 of 20 on the code revisions, but page 20 of the handout.
But taking the opposite viewpoint of what I just said, I don't think we want everybody going out there butchering the trees.
Yeah.
So but I don't, but on the other hand, when I walk down our street, some people have cleared away the branches that are coming into the the sidewalk, and some people haven't, and I feel much more warm for the people who've left me a place to walk.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't have an improvement on this, frankly, but I just hope nobody ever tries to enforce it literally.
I think that leaving the opportunity to enforce it, though, open is a good thing. I can think of a few examples of where neighbors have pruned trees in the right of way to the point where they have destroyed the tree.
Yeah. Really. Yeah, I think that's and it's the trees that aren't on people's property. Have to get from public works.
Yeah, but you have to maintain them though, they're on. It's one of these catch-22s in the city ordinance, they're not on your property. And if somebody wants to put a election sign for somebody you detest underneath the tree, they can, but you're obligated to maintain the tree. So it's and it's not just Seattle, it's not just like what everybody has to say.
For those of us who live in neighborhoods where there are no sidewalks, it's hard to know what qualifies as street trees, right? I mean, we have trees that I planted in our front yard that are close to the street, but I take responsibility for their maintenance.
Yeah, well,
It is a troublesome little sentence, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, by permit grant, is there actually a permit? Another permit that we don't know about, or supervise, is there actually a permit process involved, or is it more permission or supervision or guidance from, or?
The old language was pruned only under supervision of public works department, so it's been upgraded from supervision to permit.
I don't remember seeing any permit process for this in the pre-permit process.
this is the right of way stuff, which is all brand new.
Well,
Is this all new, this street tree pruning? And how is street tree defined? That would be my question.
I think that is a definition of
Street tree, it does have a formal definition
Okay.
earlier in the chapter.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if we want to wordsmith this here or just follow the council.
If it helps, the definition of street tree is any tree on public right of way. It's not the most specific definition.
So in certain neighborhoods like mine, that would be sort of tricky to know where that.
And the current language is street tree shall be pruned only under the supervision of the Lake Forest Park Public Works Department.
And
It is an
frankly,
interest. I own 3. I own 3, and it's an interesting conundrum.
Yeah. As somebody who has my own particular ideas about how to maintain trees in a naturalistic garden like my own, I'm not sure I'd want a city highway parks or highway department or public works department person coming out and pruning any of my trees.
Like,
So, but, I mean, I have those little yellow signs that say owner will maintain in front of our property. And I have come home at times and seen the crew having come through and mowed down the plants on either side of my little sign. And left the sign untouched. Although that hasn't happened recently, I should say. Anything else we want to talk about this, or shall we move on? So we do have a number of other things on the agenda.
That enough for you, Larry?
Yeah, I think so. The other thing I just wanted to flag is something that came up in your conversation. If you go to the very end of the ordinance, section 1614.120, this is on page 21 of the packet. It's a small amendment, but it basically said, it clarifies that any money paid for like an in lieu of for tree replacement goes into the tree fund. And then later on, it explains what the tree fund can be used for. So that means that my reading of this is that if the city collects in lieu of money, that could be used for replanting, maintaining, enhancing, etc. Which I believe was the consensus of people, that they want that flexibility. I can ask Phil just to confirm that my interpretation is correct, but it seems that that's taking your advice on board. And I think that the Stewardship Foundation had similar feedback, that allowing flexibility to use this in lieu of money for maintenance as well.
See, the critical thing was in the in lieu of section, I talked about, not so much here, but the in lieu of section said they should be used for planting trees. And what we kind of wanted to do is say, yeah, just say we'll put it in the city tree account. But it requires finding that part of the in lieu of section.
I can reach out to Phil and just kind of get some clarity to make sure that these changes are doing what we wanted them to do. But yeah.
Right. And so language in other parts of the code is not somehow more restrictive than what that is towards the end there.
Yeah, it still says for offsite replanting. It's on page 6 or page 5, but page 8 or page 5, wherever you choose to look at it.
So I'll reach out to Phil just to get his take, just to make sure that that's not a contradiction between those two sections.
Yeah, I think it is, because it says offsite replanting fee means the payment of a mitigation fee to the city keep tree account, yada, 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 for offsite replanting. We had wanted to get rid of those last 4 words for offsite, 3 or 4 words. It's in the definition, so you're in the right place. So. Yeah, just below where.
So it just says that it goes into the city tree account.
You
And
know,
then
just-
later it says what the city tree account can be used for.
And yeah, but unfortunately in this.
Yes,
where
so
it
I
says-
agree what you're saying, is that
Yeah.
those words where it says for offsite replanting should be removed, so that it's not constrained to that.
Yeah. You'll take that to powers that are, including you.
I mean, officially, the council can amend whatever we want come next Thursday, but I think I'll check with Phil to make sure that, is it as written accomplishing what we want to accomplish? But yeah, I mean, speaking as a council member, I'm on board with adding in that flexibility.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on. The next thing under old business is strategy to search for new tree board members. And I think we've been, wringing our hands and we've been, saying, wouldn't it be nice and shouldn't we get more tree board members? But we're sort of getting to a critical minimum. We already are, really. I mean, we're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can't, we have to have 4 to be a quorum, right? Because it's half of the number of board site positions there are, which is 7. And even if there are empty positions, they count in the
Yes,
denominator.
yes.
So this is not something we can let slide. And I'm not sure whose responsibility. I mean, I approached Mark about joining the board at our Arbor Day planning last spring. But before that, I'm not sure what strategy there ever was for recruiting board members. I know I knew Julia Bent, who was on the board, and so she had talked to me about joining the board, so I asked about it. But
We do quite a bit of advertising on our e-news and our print newsletter, asking for applications for board members. Beyond that, it's really just word of mouth.
Yeah.
But I'm open to any ideas because it's not just the tree board, it's.
Okay, Sandy, go ahead.
I have so many ideas.
Good.
So yes, the newsletter that goes out is a must. I feel like until we're at quorum or whatever you call it, where we've got 7 members, it should pretty much be in every single newsletter that goes out. That's the print copy. And then I think that in order to catch new fresh faces, we really need to do a social media outreach. There needs to be just a regular schedule. Once a week or once a month, a notice goes up and says, hey, have you considered on the various social media outlets that are supported by the city of Lake Forest Park. And it's fairly straightforward, rinse and repeat. But I think we just need to schedule. We just need to literally say, do it on a schedule. Here's the content, do it, repeat it over and over and over and over. And then actually after the fact, even if we had 7 members, continually doing that like on a quarterly basis in order to keep up the momentum, keep up the interest, and keep up the, hey, what if we had like alternates or backfills or come contribute, things like that. I mean, the possibilities are there, but it all starts with a repeatable message that's consistent, that reaches a broader audience. There should be something posted wherever we can, in public locations, etc. So there you go.
So I don't know how many of the outreach activities that the city undertakes, what proportion of the city's population are reached. So for example, the e-news is kind of good. I like the things that go in there, but I never received the e-news until I joined the board, and then I was automatically added to the e-news distribution list. And
You know what the distribution number is for the most popular of those?
I don't, I'd have to get back to you.
Yeah.
Don't have that information.
and I don't have the city Facebook page friended on my Facebook, so I don't see there's
I can, so Joanne, when she sends out the e-news, she also sends it to the council members. Currently 348 subscribers.
Oh,
So that's a pretty small number, given the size of the population of Lake Forest Park and the potential board members that, I mean, because a lot of those people are already the people who are civically engaged. And so what we need to try to reach, I think, are the people who are potential members who have a lot to offer but haven't been engaged yet.
Who would know what the Facebook likes or followers numbers would be? Would Joanne know that too? or
Yeah, we have access to Facebook. I don't personally
Yeah.
log into Facebook because I'm.
Yeah, that's another thing. I mean, it's, any of these are gonna reach a small fraction of the cities of the potential. And what I would like us to be able to try to come up with is some more creative ways of reaching people that, besides those.
Well-
Sandy, you're our leader on this. Sandy, go ahead.
Joanne has those numbers.
Uh-huh.
And yes, if you look at the demographics of Lake Forest Park itself, and the people that have time to work on the board, it can be different from those who might be interested in it. And so, yeah, 300 people that get the e-news is a pretty low number. I would propose that publishing of content they can target on social media by demographics. So you can literally say anyone who has their location as Lake Forest Park gets a notice. They get an ad that shows up. That's how it works. And I'm sure that Joanne's got that, at least the information. And that's kind of where I was proposing, is that we post once and then on a regular schedule promote on at least the Facebook, Instagram, targeted towards anyone who says they're a resident of Lake Forest Park.
I have a question too. This is kind of a basic question. Why is this group constituted as a board that requires a quorum? Why is it not an advisory committee that can decide by simple majority?
It's because it's in the code of the board. So it has to actually amend it either out of the code entirely or just amend it to make it an advisory committee. Actually, in a sense, downgrade it.
Yeah. But that's what we do mostly, is advise the council.
Yes. Although we do have a charge to be the educational outreach arm of the city with respect to trees. And, you know, quite a bit of what we've done over the years qualifies under that. But I don't know why that could be done by an advisory committee.
Yeah.
For example.
I used to be on the library advisory committee, and we would run everybody reads the same book thing every year. As a committee, we didn't need a quorum to make that decision.
I think there's only one category definition of boards and commissions and et cetera. They all kind of have the same requirements and the same process.
Yeah, I was just curious about what that was.
I mean, I'm trying to think, any of the other commissions have student members?
The climate action committee,
And
the Parks Advisory.
Parks Advisory, yeah. And I think, you know, I don't know what Parks and Advisory, but I know what the Climate Commission has had pretty good luck with participation with one. I think they had 2 students for a while, they were members of that. And that can work out pretty well.
High school or college?
High school level. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So I don't know how the Parks Board went about finding high school candidates.
I'm not really sure it's. I believe it counts as volunteer hours, so.
Oh, it definitely does.
That could be the benefit of 8 hours. I know.
So yeah, there's great benefits. I just wonder how there are a lot of high school students, from my recollections, being a high school student, that might not work well on a board. So,
Yeah. Sandy?
Turns out that our high school, Shorecrest, has an annual senior requirement for volunteer hours.
oh yeah, yeah.
And they are always desperate to get those graduates graduating with their volunteer hours. That was something that we had spoken about in, I think, January or February. It came up as an opportunity to go ahead and reach out to the high school and have them kind of broadcast that we had an opportunity to work with them. We were, I think at the time, talking more about events where we would have them come to the events and help work at the events as volunteers, and then we would sign off. FYI.
They have an environmental club too, I believe, at Shore Crest.
Would this help us with our, I mean, I think it's a wonderful idea to get the high school kids involved. Would it help us with our quorum problems? Would they be official?
Yeah, I think they'd be, if we, I don't think, they'd be full regular members.
And you get their parents. Just saying.
But one other thing, so talking about the fact that the e-news only goes to 348 people. I guess it's a quarterly mailing, it goes to everybody. And maybe we should make sure that every issue of that, many issues of that have something about trees in it. Just finish it off with interested in the tree board's work or more by signing up or something like maybe just some kind of a advertising phrase. It's something that actually does go to everybody in the county, city. Not the county.
I've had conversations, email conversations with Joanne about that. She was very good about describing the different publications that she manages, and her comment was that the printed copies of the news are restricted in terms of content. You can't cram everything in there because there's space limitations.
Right.
So, and there's always room for something that's of the minute or something that residents need to know. So if we had something we wanted on the tree board, that might get pushed out. So it's not a guarantee that we get something in every time. However, if we did have a little tagline that said, are you interested in the tree board? You know, a short paragraph, we might be able to get that in most times. So that would be a quarterly notice at least.
And it would get wider distribution and then.
Yeah.
And as someone pointed out,
Additional,
we'd be preaching a little less to the choir.
Yeah.
I think the mayor is very concerned about this matter. And I think he'd be happy to, whenever he could put a sentence or two into his, he's always got a piece in that quarterly publication.
And if you wanted to add, high school student or even junior school student, we could amend the code to make that happen.
Do you think an amendment would be necessary? I wonder.
Yeah, it would be necessary. It would, yeah.
Says you're gonna be 18 or older or something.
To, because it says.
Something to be mindful of, if you add a seat, you're increasing the denominator, which does potentially increase. So going from 7 to 8, quorum would still be 5. Actually, it would go up.
Right.
So currently quorum is 4 out of 7. If you add a seat, it would become 5 out of 8.
Or you gotta do is live here.
I don't.
Reside in oral property.
I would recommend that we amend that to say. Yeah, add a high school student. That was the.
Is there a specific language like that for the Parks Board?
Yep.
But because I don't see any reason a high school student couldn't just become a member of the board.
There's no.
As long as he
age
resides in the
requirement,
city, doesn't have to own property, it's just a little unusual for high school students.
Well, that may have some excitement, what's proper in terms of consistency.
One. So the senior high school student, so I would.
No.
I would recommend if that's the code, of course you wanted to go, then, so you have. Get up a board.
But by saying that
Or-
one should be, then we could keep it at 7,
Yeah,
and we would
Yeah. It is a shall be, so.
That would
yeah,
increase the
that
quorum
might be
requirement.
One maybe. I don't know, what, is that worth, asking Larry to take to the council for thought, or
Well, I think
is there interest in that?
I would like to think that the council would find it important to help fill these boards, the board, and that since we have had sort of a chronic under enrolled tree board, with a list with 7 people and 2 3-year terms being the maximum, that means we have to have one new person, at least one new person a year. And over the time I've been on the board, very few people have stayed on the board for that full 6-year tenure. So it really has been more like 2 turnover, 2 per year, and that requires pretty steady recruiting, I think, to keep up that level of participation. And we haven't been doing it. I mean, it's
I guess I just
Sandy
don't
is
see why we can't do
interested in
student
stepping off because of her remote living situation, and that's understandable. And so, really, we need 3 members. And I'm going to be up before too long.
Yeah, I mean, some of you have been on board for a while now, so it's gonna be continuing issue. See, I don't really see why we can't go ahead and put a high school, just include a high school.
I agree.
Among the people we have,
I agree.
we don't need. Maybe a little, I'm not really very excited about saying one of them has to be a high school student. Right. Because that tradition is gonna keep turning over all the time too.
I don't know how to go about reaching out to high school.
We'd be something to do that.
Sandy, do you know?
I would have ideas, but.
Yeah, I could probably dig up a name
Okay.
and
Okay,
forward it off to someone.
sure.
We used to work hard to get students involved in the stream keepers, the water test.
Oh, yeah.
And that was kind of a hit and miss operation, but they have ways over there, people to, without how they publicize it within the school. Like I said, there is an environmental club of some sort that I think we could visit probably if we wanted to talk to them.
Mhm.
Whatever other thoughts Sandy might have on that.
Well, my thought is that I will reach out to the high school and come back with a list of the teacher advisors who will then follow up with the students.
I guess the only thing I'm kicking around in my head is how we would, be sure that it wasn't a student who was getting in over their head. In terms of the level of commitment, monthly meetings is pretty cut and dry.
It's what the advisors are for.
Yeah, that's right. People who know the students could recommend them, I guess.
The other concern about it is that if, as it seems, having seniors who are doing their volunteer hours, well, they might be a board member for a year, maybe not even a full year, right? If they get
Yeah,
on
no.
fall and then they graduate in the spring and they're off to college or a summer job or something. The continuity of multiple years is important, I think, for a board function.
It is.
So, yeah, I say it's something that you shouldn't discount, but not count on. And then the actually kind of what I wanted to say before, not students, but just in general from the constituency, it would be also a good kind of thing right now. We've got a lot of visibility because of the work that Sound Transit's doing in our community, and leveraging that and reaching out to those who have been attending and paying attention to, that have an interest in continuing as a tree board member. That I'm not quite sure exactly how to target that audience, but I feel like figuring out that as a way, maybe even having a handout at some of these meetings, or I don't really know quite exactly how we could do it. But like you said, talking to someone at the Arbor event would be kind of a great way of reaching out to the community.
Well, I don't know how we should proceed on this, whether we want to have a, a committee of the board or a committee of the whole that takes this up as a task, but talking about it for 10 minutes at a board meeting doesn't necessarily make things happen, right? I think we need to have a plan or some, even if it's just asking each board member to ask 5 community members that they may know if they know of somebody who would be interested. Part of the problem with that is a lot, I've worked all my career at the university and I don't really know that many residents of Lake Forest Park. And you're probably the same way, Doug. I mean, apart from a few neighbors and a few friends I've made, I don't know the community members well. And so it's hard for me to even know how to go about finding people who might be appropriate. One of the elements of it where it says you must be a resident or a own property or have expertise. And so it might be we could recruit from people who might live beyond the boundaries of it. If we could get somebody who, maybe somebody who owns a tree care company or somebody who is a professional arborist, in the North Seattle, South King or North King County area, who might be willing to donate some time.
I think you'd get a different perspective if we did that.
Well,
So I think that's just where we are, Richard, at this point. I heard one concrete idea seemed to come out from Sandy in terms of maybe checking with the high school about that possibility there, but I don't think we're ready to commit to that as a strategy at this point, but we should be maybe looking at that.
but I think
So going back to the general constituency, Marty, I know you've been working with Joanne. Is there a possibility that you could follow up with her about getting something repeated in the print news as well as on social media?
Can I
John,
just throw out 2 things? The Stewardship Foundation has about 570 people on their newsletter. Certainly we could send out some.
that would be great.
If you came up with something, Sandy, Marty, we could get that in the newsletter. I think I can safely commit to that. The other idea, we do have a tree company in Lake Forest Park, Baby Tree Company. I wonder if somebody, the Woodland, different perspective, and they're professionals. That might be worth somebody stopping by. I've talked to them on different matters. They're open to discussing things. Sometimes they're perceived as, by some as the enemy, but they're professionals. They're really pretty good. Just an idea.
We also have out on
It may be, just maybe I'm familiar with. I've actually done. Potentially, they may speak to our board for 15 or 20 minutes just to give an overview of trees from their perspective.
But if we put together a paragraph, could we get it in your?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and we typically send it out once every couple of months. I've worked with Cam.
Okay.
And for a bit of context, the rules for who can be a member of a board, it's people who live in the city or work in the city. I believe it's limited 1 person who doesn't live here but works here. So someone who works for instance, Davy Tree would be eligible to join the board if they were interested.
Yeah. Okay. Marty, could I ask you to draft a short paragraph to send to John?
Yep.
Thank you.
One of the really nice things about having somebody, an arborist like Baby Tree would be, is that one of the reasons we keep going through city arborists so fast is that I think apparently because so many people disagree with the rules, have trouble with the rules. Possibly if we had an arborist on the board, they could find ways to make the rules a little bit more workable with, without moving things we're really striving for.
Yeah. That's the only concern I would have about having somebody from a tree service company, is that there might be a conflict of interest that would arise on some rare occasion with respect to how implementation of code or something would impact commercial interests that they may have with respect to that. Although I think that would probably be relatively rare.
I think no, it's worth somebody reaching out to them, I think.
I'll look at local tree service companies. Davy and out on a limb as well.
I just did a search for them, I couldn't find one.
Which one?
Out on a limb. I've heard of them too, but I can't find them.
Yeah, I can't quite remember the one that runs the company. I can probably figure it out.
I've worked with Champion Tree Care for work at my house. They're somewhere up here in North King County, but I don't think they're in Lake Forest Park. But Dan Kraus is their owner and operator, is a really good arborist who has, you know, the concern for the natural environment as foremost in the work that he does, which I appreciate.
I'll see if I can find a contact. I'm concerned we better get to the web stuff.
Okay.
Danny's been working on.
Yeah, okay, let's go to new business. Website update proposal. Sandy, take it away.
All right. I'm gonna go fast, but what I'm gonna do is basically leave you with something to think about, because there is a lot to review, and then we can discuss the approach to reviewing is what I think we should do. So I wanted to start by just kind of reminding everyone or letting you know my story. So last winter, we had a rather dramatic experience in my on my property with the trees, and I am on the tree board, and I was unable to find an awful lot. I was unable to find any information on the city website about what it was that I could do in order to take care of my trees, mitigate my issues, and follow up correctly on what to do. So that's kind of the why I think that it's really important to do a reorganization of the city tree board and tree permit pages. So there you go. That's why I think it's important. My recommendation is to reorganize the content into 2 pages. So right now there are quite a few sub pages, and my recommendation is to remove those in favor of sections on the 2 main pages. What this accomplishes is easier readability. So users can scan for the information. You look at a single page, you look at a heading, you skip that paragraph, you go to the next heading, you kind of scroll around. It's usability that people are comfortable with, and is kind of a modern search technique. Additionally, it is very much easier to maintain. So there's no more hunting. Is the content here? Is it there? Is it on this page? Is it on that page? Is there a link here or a link there? That solves the problem with repeated content. It solves the problem with broken links as well. Oh, as well as keeping that content current. I have a little bit more to add on that overall that gets a little bit more into the details of how to make the updates. I'm unfamiliar with the city's processes. The overall approach would be, so that's like the purpose. The overall approach would be to take all of the repeated content and move it to a single location and add a reference link to the new locations. So that would include archiving. So we've got archived information in 4 different locations. We should probably just put it all in the city's archive, and then link to the city's archive. Additionally, the facts are in like 6 different, I mean, they're everywhere. And the code is actually also in at least 3 different places. And the code should be in one place. We should kind of give a summary statement and then refer to the code. Same thing as the archive. We should give a summary statement and then refer to the archive. So able to expand the topic if they want. Oh, right. That enables users to expand the topic if they want, but get a short synopsis, 1 sentence, 1 bullet, 1 line, the information I need right now. And then it, again, is only one-stop shopping for actually making those updates. Grouping information together so that information about tree board, tree maintenance, recommended trees, why do you like trees, all of that is on one page on one location. And then how do you do a permit? Here's the details that you need to get that permit completed, and then you can drill down, is on another page, and you're not kind of having to go back and forth or even into some of the sub pages. So I tried to do that. So I took a look at all of the pages on the Lake Forest Park City website that references tree and tree boards and tree permit specific information. And I consolidated it into 2 pages. So that whole long proposal, that whole long sentence is attached, I think, in your handout packet as the website proposal. It's actually something that I kind of gave like over a year ago, but I wanted to recap it and make sure that it was consolidated in a specific way. Then the other 2 items or pages in your packet are the tree board page and the tree permit page. For the tree board page, I was much more successful at consolidating and have a much more solid recommendation. For the permit page itself, I had a lot more challenges. I'd like to see the content as a reader. I would like to see the content reduced into bullets and then references to the code, but I wasn't quite sure technically what was code versus how to make a sentence, etc. So would definitely be looking to someone else for that. Before I kind of go much farther, I did have one open question that I thought we should first discuss, though, before even diving into content changes. And that is, at the city, who does that update? Sometimes I've heard it called a webmaster. There is a link I did find that calls it the webmaster, but it doesn't go anywhere. So
it's actually updated by department. So it's by department that updates their own pages. So in this case, it was done by the arborist.
Which
so
are
the arborist.
Yeah.
I believe the the one that's up there now was actually mainly updated by Hannah. So Hannah did a
Oh.
little work on it.
Does Joanne do any coordinating among
yeah.
departments or?
Ooh.
Joanne and I oversee the entire website, so we actually, technically, if we were looking for a webmaster, that would be Joanne, me, and Aaron, our IT director.
Looks like-
Okay,
Cindy, it looks like somebody has made a fair number of edits to the website since you prepared these pages. Because quite a few of the things you suggested doing have been done.
okay, that's good. Yeah, I made the changes back in July. And,
Including, by the way, not naming the arborist. Somebody got all the references to Hannah.
right, yes, I wasn't, I did not review for edits for correctness. So spelling, names, any of the content, I was reviewing for organization of the content. So yeah. Okay, so the answer would be the arborist has been the one who would be implementing the proposal. Is that right?
Generally, yes, but we don't have an arborist, so.
Well, right. Okay. No, that's actually better than I thought it would be as an answer. So that's great.
I guess I have a similar question when I was looking at this stuff, Sandy. The copies that we had are in many cases not what's on the website now, where you've got text and you propose changes. I was curious where the base text that you were using.
I literally copied the website back in June and then made edits. And what that is it's a Word document. I mean, you guys have a print copy, but what it is a Word document that has that track changes option on it. And then I added comments. So
I can comment about why there's a difference. It's because if you notice on our website, we had an overlay update, and in that process, we asked all the departments to update their pages. Oh.
Yep. So, yeah.
So does that mean Sandy should start back over with what's current on there, or?
No, that does not mean that.
Or can we just?
No.
From what Sandy's
The
doing
approach is the same.
from there.
I think we can work with what Sandy's proposing and make those changes where appropriate.
That's good.
Okay, yeah. So what that would be is that the proposal then is the approach to reworking the two websites, just two web pages, excuse me, two web pages. So, okay, so that's good. Okay, so for example, on the tree board page, the number one update would be to take everything in archive that's in the section that says archive and archive it. Put it in the city archive. And then this includes meeting agendas and materials, work plans, reports, and instead create a 2-sentence link that says, hey, you want to go see something about agendas, materials, work plans, and reports? Click here. And then you are redirected to the archive. The other major change would be to move and consolidate information about tree and forest care and the tree walks. So those should not be subpages. The content on those two pages should be all on the tree board page. So I can go ahead and redo, however, that leads me to the next question of kind of how to do it is, so now that we know that it would be packaging this up as a proposal for the arborist, I'm pretty confident that the arborist is not comfortable with website design, headers, things like that, HTML. But the IT, you mentioned someone in IT.
It's, you're thinking of like it's an actual program. It's an actual, it's done through Civic Plus. It's a program.
Civic Plus, got it.
It's not a program where we actually have to code.
Yep. Okay, so it's via Civic Plus. So you have headers and bullets that you pick. You can make a header.
Yes.
Okay, got it. I remember Civic Plus. Okay. All right. So then, okay, that's good to know. That's actually a lot easier.
Well,
That's easier.
Sandy,
So then,
I don't mean to interrupt, but I would just like to ask, clarify for me what I'm understanding is the kind of the overall picture of what your plan would be to do this. I see in the proposal, I see the inventory of the existing content. And so I can understand how that, those web pages, I assume that's kind of how all these topics are incorporated currently. But so I don't see a counterpart to that you propose. Maybe I'm not.
there
You-
was a page that said, tree board. It's titled tree board. I don't know quite where it landed in the
You
packet.
produced a piece called Lake Forest Park Tree Board. Yep.
Yes, that's it.
And,
That's the one.
and okay, so how would that still be accessed through the department?
Lake Forest Park Tree, yeah. Matt's got it up on the screen.
Access, because it's a commission. It's access under the commission.
Tree board, keep going down.
Yeah.
There you go. Tree board,
Okay.
that one. Okay, so
Okay.
what I did was I copy pasted the content on this page. And my proposal is where you see, well, the first part's the same, but then what does a tree board do? That stays the same. Keep going. But now stop. So where you see meeting agendas and materials, that the work plans and the annual reports is all the same as the archive information. So the proposal would be that information goes into the archive.
Would
And
that
then,
not be accessible to somebody who just wanted to see it?
yeah.
Would it be hard to access?
No. So,
Or just another link in the
I
process?
think if you navigate up and then you navigate to, oh, there, no, I'm sorry. It's right there on your screen. At the bottom in the footer where it says agendas and minutes.
Oh.
It's right there. So this is city council, right? But see, tree board meetings are in here, etc. So that's my proposal. My proposal is to put the information in the archive. That needs to be archived, right? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm still not clear. So if somebody wanted to see the work plan for the tree board, the current work plan, they could find it right there in that list? Are you saying that list should be smaller of, 2017 annual reports, maybe not necessary to be on there? But
yeah, my proposal is that instead of the header that says annual reports, you would instead see a sentence that says, here is the 2020 annual report. although it should say the 2023 annual report or the 2022 annual report. So you would say, here is the 2022 annual report for this year's report or next year's or last year's or previous year's reports. Please click here, see the agendas and minutes, and then you would end up on the agendas and minutes archive page. So yeah, if you wanted to see history, you have to search. But if you want to see the current information, it's right there.
So can I
Same
ask you
thing with the work plan.
just a content question? Why are the more recent annual reports not here? Has somebody just neglected to upload them over the last few years?
I honestly, I have no idea.
Because we submit them to the council every year, they get approved. And, you know, we just carry on,
Yeah.
but
I will look for the annual reports and see which was up to date.
Mhm.
I never know what happens to them after, and frankly, I didn't realize that I could even look and find them on the tree board thing, but I should have known that.
Yes. So yes, actually that's pretty much, if it's not relevant, it shouldn't be on the page. It should be in the agendas and minutes archive. And the user should be redirected to where that information is if they're looking for it. And it should be in one location. So agendas and minutes should be in agendas and minutes. And then if you want to put a sentence on this page that says, go find them, here it is, but you shouldn't have to copy paste them in both locations. So I don't know about the annual reports, but the work plans are, I found some. This is it. It is sometimes it's here and sometimes it's there. I am recommending that it never be in two places. It's easier for consistency of readability and it's easier for maintenance. So the arborist doesn't have to work at it. The arborist knows meetings, work plans, annual reports, minutes, documents all go into agendas and minutes for all of the boards, for, you know, all of the councils, and then we reference that here. So yeah.
Point out that you say that they're in multiple places. It's actually only stored in one place. These are all links to the same place.
Okay, even better. So yeah, it would be even better if we just didn't link it. It's a kind of at this point an industry standard as a recommendation. I mean, we obviously can do whatever you want, but that's part one, is to archive and consolidate, archive information so that, you know, there is a sentence that says, hey, you want to know about this, go here. Or do you want to know about the history, not the current. I would actually recommend that the 2022 annual report, the 2023 work plan, and maybe last month's meeting minutes were there.
But then I'm
But
not sure what you mean by
sentences
archive.
that,
I'm not quite sure what you're meaning by archive.
agenda and minutes is usually called it's
The formal sense of
industry.
archive is someplace where stuff is stored, you know, away from. It sounds like a lot of what you're saying could just be another page linked from this page. It would have all this stuff. It doesn't need to go on the main page.
Yes, yeah, the direction would be, the usability would be, and I can only talk to it, but the usability for the bottom sentence and the bottom sections for archive would be two sentences. I recommended two sentences that say, here is the annual work plan for 2023 and the annual report for 2022, period. For more information, please see our agenda and minutes. Click here.
Can I diverge a little bit from this page? I don't know, maybe I don't, if we want to spend more time talking about this. I'm trying to get an overview, Sandy, of all this work that you've been doing, which is pretty amazing. I see in the material that I got, there's all of this we've been talking about is under the category of tree board.
Correct. Yeah, I haven't mentioned the other one yet.
We saw the entry link into that. Then I'm
Right.
seeing tree and forest care.
Right.
A major one on tree permits. And then tree and forest care, and then another one, tree walks. Seen as a separate one.
Well, right, not tree permits, go back. You're gonna have to do a search. There is a page for tree and forest care. So if you type, I can't even remember now how to find it. I am looking for tree and forest care.
Yeah, that's an issue for me. To find anything about trees, you so often have to use the search field.
Yes, I agree. I don't think it should be that way. My proposal is to that one right there. That page there goes away. Copy paste the content onto the tree board page.
I would respectfully disagree with that, because the tree board page is for just the tree board committee. It's not for tree and forest care information. It would be.
Yeah, it seems like, yeah.
Well, what we might have is just a trees and Lake Forest Park page. And it can include the tree board, the tree and forest care.
There you go.
That's
But I kind of read this is all tree board stuff.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
what it-
Between tree board business and the
Right.
accessory outreach activities that are tangential to the tree board business.
But it could all be in the same page. It could just be three items, the way Sandy had it, just
Yes.
calling it tree board page. But can I
Yep.
just make a comment that occurred, looking as bad as been skimming around here.
Right.
One of the problems we have, I think, and this is not just about this, is that the city website is organizationally organized, so it's sort of, stuff is organized by which committee or commission it's under. And that may not be the most that may be the reason it's so hard to find things, because you don't necessarily know which commission. And I don't know what we can do about that. That's a citywide thing. We can't say, the whole city ought to reorganize the way we'd like it. But
it is on our radar. It's just time is the biggest thing.
yeah, I just realizing that as I watch you say that that's one of the reasons it's so hard to find stuff.
I can find things when I'm looking for something like tree list, tree ordinance, tree walks and so on, but I think what we want to do is have it more transparent for people who don't know what to search for, but who come to the tree board page for information about how do I deal with trees or permits or whatever else as a Lake Forest Park.
Yeah, I think even though it doesn't fit in with the organization, the way it's organized, a page of tree stuff.
It's not.
We have all of it. I mean, the tree board,
Links.
permits, links to everything, yeah.
So Sandy, I really commend you for your start on this. I think it would be, unfortunately, it sounds like we don't know who to work with on this, or Matt, is there someone specifically?
You can work with me directly since there's no arborist.
Okay.
So Sandy and Matt, can you guys work together to start to implement some of these things? And it sounds like there'll be necessarily be some back and forth about what's possible and what's desirable. Yeah.
Sandy, are you trying to leave the tree board just because you can't come to meetings? Because, you're doing also wonderful work remotely.
Well, yeah, this sort of thing can be done remotely. We're grateful for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is remote. This is fine. In my new unexpected life, I am out of town Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That's it. And then I'm back in town Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. And then that's my new life. And so that's the challenge, right? You get.
You're being in the tree board. If you're
Huh?
kind of done with the tree board, that's fine.
Oh,
But
no.
I don't
no.
see it being a barrier.
No.
My son works for a company in California.
Yeah.
And he goes down once every 2 months
You know what? I do this all the time. This is how most of my day is. So, no, it's not. It has nothing to do with the tree board. It's that I'm not in person, and yeah, that's a challenge. So.
We're too desperate for tree board members to make little thing like.
I know. I haven't. It's been.
Well,
It's
thanks,
been
Sandy. I
since
want to thank you
January,
for all this
so-
work and for bringing us up to date.
Yeah.
And
So I'll follow up with Matt, and then
yes, please do that.
I'll follow up with Matt, and then we'll look forward to chatting again in November.
We're rapidly approaching 9 o'clock, and I
Yep.
want to be able to adjourn on time. And so there's the next item on the agenda was arborist permit information, and this also, Sandy, you were down. Is this something we can postpone till next month? Okay, and I think yeah, and the planning for next canopy study, which is something Doug, you mentioned, I think postponed too, because
Actually-
that's not pressing.
And yeah, we can't do it in 3 minutes.
Yes.
Sandy's.
Sandy, yeah. Go
I
ahead,
did want
Sandy.
to say, actually, I will forward off to Marty, because and you or something. What it is was basically I did the flyer.
Trifold.
I did the trifold that includes the advertisement for the tree board. Tree
Okay.
board vacancies.
Yeah.
Right? Tree board vacancies. And I have content to not repeat, excuse me, the same format for Arborist.
Okay, great.
So that's my proposal, was just to forward that to someone else.
Yeah,
I
that's
do
just-
have that, but we have to overcome we have to find funding to print it and distribute it.
Okay.
And I know
But
that
it could be reused for social media.
Well, why don't we ask Matt to see if there's some funding to get this printed in.
I was gonna, it's kind of a related question, the tree replacement fund or the tree money came up. And is any of that available for this kind of publicity? If so, I'd like to find out.
I'd have to.
Yeah, I'd like to
search
know.
it.
It's real borderline.
Yeah, I think that is pushing a little bit, because it's sort of more on the ground stuff, I
I
think is
know,
what it's.
then we have no
designed for.
funding, we have to find
Yeah.
funding.
The mayor did promise money for the educational information about the ivy.
Yeah.
And maybe we could slip that in with this. So just in with
If
that.
it helps, here's the language, that the tree fund can be used for acquiring, managing, maintaining, preserving forested areas, planting and maintaining trees, and other purposes relating to trees as determined by the city council. So, already the city council explicitly authorizing it, I don't think education publicity is under that.
That's what I concluded too.
I'm sure we could probably find someone to print some flyers or whatever they are. If
Well, we had one that the Stewardship Foundation kindly sent to me, Kim sent to me, that we could build on and send out jointly with the Stewardship Foundation. That's what we were gonna do in support of this Ivy demonstration. And then the work that Sandy did putting together those two trifolds, we could have those available if we have other events, or if we go to Arbor Day again or something like that. But again, they take money for printing and distribution. So, and there's not a problem getting estimates for that kind of stuff. It's real easy to do.
I can look into it.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, Matt, thank you for including the permit information. I don't think we need to go over that. Agenda for next meeting, I would just ask that anybody has any agenda items, send me a note, and I'll work with Matt to put together the agenda for next month's meeting. And then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Quick question for,
Okay.
curious, the timeline then for the tree inventory stuff. I thought it was imminent, looking forward to it, or where are we with that, if anybody know?
It is imminent. It's meant to be sometime this month. So hopefully in the tree board's November meeting, you'll have the inventory to discuss.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, at the last meeting, the council approved the amendment to the contract to make sure that there was an extra 10,000 so that watershed can finish up the inventory.
Will our next meeting be on the first then? November first?
Is that the first Wednesday?
Yeah, it's the first Wednesday, yeah, relevant, because I won't be here the second. So.
Okay, yeah, it's the first Wednesday of the month. It's the, you know, group. All right,
I
move
move
to
to
adjourn. Second,
Second.
all in favor? Thank you all. We'll see you next month.
Thank you, Matt. Yes.
Yeah, it was great having you all.